right. In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful, we give him praise and thanks for his mercy and his goodness to the human family. If all the trees upon the earth were pens to write with, and if all the oceans were ink, and then another 7 oceans to add to its supply, the writing would still not be enough to explain the glory of God, for he's the exalted, all-powerful, all-wise. We confide in no other in our time of need, and we praise no other in our good fortune. He is one. And even if I lived to be 1,000, it would still not be enough to thank God for his many blessings and gifts. This is Brother Sharif with the Hour of Power. Go to Hour of Power, Sharif Hamid on YouTube. Subscribe and share the channel so we can continue to lift the mind, body, and soul of our people. Before we get into this much needed and powerful interview tonight, just a few community announcements about what's going on in our great city here, which is on the rise, which you will see from a historical perspective tonight. This Saturday, September 22nd at 3 p.m. at Cherry Lane, we will have the 4th annual York Soul event, which is a conglomeration of arts, crafts, and music. So that's it, York Soul. Anyone who is here in York, it's right next to the old Zakey's there at Cherry Lane. So that's the York Soul event this Saturday, September 22nd at 3 p.m. Arts, crafts, music, and good clean food. The very next day, the historic Pan-African Gathering and Market will be from 11 to 6, September 23rd at Penn Park. Again, that's the Pan-African Market and Gathering. Look up Sister Akila Karima on Facebook for any other details with that. We'll have vendors, food, drumming, the whole nine will be there. Many speakers. I'll actually be speaking at that event and doing something to bring the people together. So again, that's this Sunday, September 23rd, rain or shine at Penn Park from 11 to 6, the Pan-African Market and Gathering. It's been a long time coming. I know our sister, Miss Marion Howard, and Mr. Willie Howard is smiling because this is what they wanted with Pan-Africanism finally coming here to York, PA. Much shout out to my good brother Akiba Bird back in North Carolina for teaching me the Harambe circle and different African rituals, which I'll be doing there. So without no further, one more thing. Tomorrow, September the 20th at 7:30, I'll be interviewing my good brother Walter Jenkins. This brother, unfortunately, he suffered a life-threatening injury back on April the 24th. He was shot in the head. He went to the hospital. He was in a coma. 5 days later, the authorities came and took him to jail for parole violation back in 2010. He received very little medical care, no therapy. He said he was treated less than an animal. Again, 5 days after he was shot in the head and in a coma, they came and picked him up, took him to jail, to the county jail. And then after they took him to jail, then they took him to Berks County prison. So the brother, I know this brother, he's been through some horrific things. So I will be interviewing him tomorrow at 7:30 on Facebook Live. So without no further ado, we have a very special brother with us tonight. He is going to drop some atomic bombs on us. So get your pen and paper out. And like I said with the promo to this interview, you're going to learn today. So without no further ado, our good brother Jeff Kirkland, introduce yourself, brother.
Thank you, brother Sharif. I want to thank you for inviting me on to your program. I watch your program, looking for the energy that you're putting out into the community. I'm very happy that you chose to come back to this community and take advantage of the powers of the mass media and social media and all. It could be a very powerful instrument in helping to propagate and grow our cultural identity and our cultural presence here in this community and in any community. Again, I want to thank you for that. Also want to thank God, Brother Sharif, for the strength and the perseverance and the determination that he has endowed our ancestors with. And why ancestors? Because as they struggled for survival during one of the most vicious and most spiritually and psychologically destructive episodes ever experienced in human history. The system of chattel slavery, where one person has absolute power over the life, fortunes, and liberty of another. The goal of this project I've been working on, which is York's Black History, is to collect, organize, and document the history and experiences of the York's Black community, with the aims of educating current and future generations about this experience, and to encourage and inspire them to reconnect to the very strong and positive cultural values and traditions which help our ancestors persevere and grow during the most difficult of times. In essence, we are helping to develop a sense of cultural identity in York's Black community, both individually and communally, by highlighting the dignity, the determination, and the excellence displayed by our ancestors. Why do I continue to talk about culture? Why do I think culture is important? And why do I look down upon us being cut off from our ancient values and our traditions? Culture is important. Let's listen to this. At some point in life, everyone embarks on a journey trying to find out who they are. A person's identity is determined by the groups and culture within which they belong. This is known as your cultural identity. Culture gives us at least three things: identity, purpose, and direction. It lets us know who we are in the world and how we relate to other people in the world, what we need to be about, our purpose, and it gives us a way to go about living our life. When an individual or group struggles to develop a strong identity, they undergo what is known as an identity crisis, a period of uncertainty and confusion due to the change in their expected aims or roles in society. This precisely describes the historic experience of Black people here in York, PA. And one of the benefits I find of studying history is to help clarify present-day problems or issues by means of revealing past events or attitudes. Why do I say that? You know, a lot of people around here, they talk about why can't Black folks get together? I mean, we had a conference, Black Leadership Conference, a few weeks ago, and many of the speakers, you know, talked about how unity is the key in almost all endeavors that we do, whether it was economic development, you know, whether it was dealing with or stopping discriminatory actions, whether it was education. And there's been a concerted effort, you know, to ensure that we don't come to the level of unity that it would take for our community to thrive. I don't know if you want me to go into a couple of the incidences. One of the first ones, you know, that I discovered in researching this history was something called the Conspiracy of the Negroes. That's in 1803.
1803.
1803.
Here in York.
Here in York, PA.
Okay.
During that time, Blacks in this community, it wasn't many of them, but they were angry at the way they were being treated. And just like the riots of 1968 and 69, there was a flashpoint at that time that set the anger from those times into a bigger uprising. They were angry because one of their own, a lady named Margaret Bradley, had been sent to prison. Prisons were in Philadelphia at the time, Eastern State Penitentiary, really.
Right.
And they had sent her to prison because she allegedly had poisoned the two of the ladies that she had worked for. She denied it and all, but they sent her to prison anyway. And the rest of the Negroes, they called them Negroes at the time, in town got together and decided they weren't going to take it anymore. They want to burn the town down. So for the next 5 or almost 6 weeks, they surreptitiously snuck around and burned fires, large fires, almost burned the town down. There are drawings of that incident drawn by a famous York artist named Louis Miller. You'll see them at the Historical Society or whatever. They couldn't find out who was doing it. They didn't know what was going on with those. And the governor sent in troops. They put out big rewards for people to stop it, but it went on for like 5 weeks without them discovering who it was. After a while, one of the people, conspirators, slipped up and got caught trying to set a fire in the afternoon, early in the afternoon. And they end up getting the information out of her and capturing the other conspirators, end up giving them a trial. But after that happened, there was a mistrust amongst blacks being on their own. The community fathers did not like, blacks congregating together. They even had laws to where you couldn't get together. When new blacks came to town, they had vagrancy laws. If you were gathering with other people, you couldn't come to town. From 1803 to 1819, you couldn't come to town unless you had a pass. And if you were new in town, you had to go register at the magistrate's office.
It's almost like the black codes in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
You couldn't, certain amount of black men couldn't congregate on a corner.
That's exactly
Couldn't
right.
spit on the sidewalk.
That's
Couldn't
exactly
walk in
right.
front of a white person.
That's right.
It's almost the same thing.
Well, and the black codes was not only in Washington, D.C. I mean, that was something that affected blacks all over, even here in the North.
Right.
I could talk about later on, even in the 40s, when they had what we called our Black Wall Street up on Princess Street. I think I have a photograph, of that street, right where York High is right now. Across the street, it's a parking lot now. But they had a lot of black businesses, restaurants, clubs.
Wow.
They had a club called the Fourth Ward Social Club there. That was before the Elks of Legion and all was also in that block. A couple churches and all, and the police used to come along and telling the men, these are grown men just standing around talking. You fellas, you boys have to move on. Let's move on. And one time they wanted to do that, and some of the men, many of them I know personally that I've socialized with over the years, with their kids anyway, said they were tired of it. They weren't going to do it anymore, and they told them they weren't moving. So the cops tried to arrest them, and they end up running into the Fourth Ward Social Club, and the police chased them into the social club.
Wow.
And I don't know why they did that, because once they got in there, the rest of the people in there, they went on the police like white on rice. When they beat one policeman so bad that he was in the hospital in a coma for almost 2 weeks ago. And it just exacerbated from that point on. I mean, throughout history, there were incidences, similar to that, where they did not trust. There's incidences when the first black churches were formed. I'm going to be going over a lot of things, man, trying to get some things in here and all like that.
Right.
But I'm trying to draw this thing in of where this mistrust comes from. The churches, one of the first black churches was Zion, AME Zion Church.
On Princess Street?
Zion is on Queen Street right now.
Oh,
It
okay.
moved from several places. The first Zion was on Duke Street down towards where the welfare office is. And then they moved in the 1800s up on King Street, King and Queen, where the Bond building is.
Right.
And they stayed there for about 60 years before they finally moved to Pershing Avenue.
Now, that's an AME church on Princess Street. Is that
That's
correct?
Bethel.
That's Bethel?
That was one of the other ones that came
Okay.
after Zion.
Okay.
I have a photograph here of the black churches and all that developed in there. But the black people were first going to a church called First Presbyterian. That was the big church right across from the Martin Memorial Library.
You talking about the 50s now? Or 40s?
No, this was in the 1800s.
Wow.
Yeah, this was the 1800s.
You going way back.
Yeah, yeah. This is because that's when a lot of these dynamics in that we're experiencing now and have to deal with. That's where they began. So they formed this church, and the powers that be that was running the community, many of them powerful families. Names now. I don't want to get into mentioning names and all now, but they'll be in the book that I'm writing and all. But they had the blacks working in their homes. Okay, so they were a little mistrustful of these blacks who were going to church, congregating with other blacks. They didn't know what they was doing, whether they was conspiring against them in their homes and all. So they helped another group of blacks form another church out of First Presbyterian. It was called Faith Presbyterian. It's a symbolic church because it happened to be one of the most powerful. It ended up being one of the most powerful black churches of its time, as far as its impact on the black community. Guys like George Bowles, Dr. George Bowles, who was an icon in York, one of the greatest black men that come from York. He was a Dr. Bowles. He was head of the American Medical Association. He was one of the founders of the Crispus Attucks Community Center. They ran other centers before that called the Community House and other things. Bowles helped start Boy Scouts. Him, Reverend Monteith. I don't know if you heard of Reverend Monteith.
Yes, I have.
Reverend Monteith ran a black book and magazine store on the corner of Newberry and Princess Street. But he also came out dynamic minister out of Faith Presbyterian. he would have a letter to the editor in the paper every week talking about issues related to blacks. These men were unapologetically black. Their whole mission in life was to uplift the black community.
Now, were they connected to Pan-Africanism?
No, I think they at that time I don't think it was, people, because this was in the 1800s now.
Right.
Pan-Africanism was a
Right.
relatively newer idea up in
Right.
the 1900s.
Right, with Marcus Garvey.
With Nkrumah and those guys, Marcus Garvey and folks like that came along. But these guys were solely, just like Pan-African was, for hopefully doing things for the benefit of the African-American community around the world. They were also strictly about doing business for the black community, uplifting black community. They helped to start the first black schools. The first one was formed in Zion AME Church. They ran the schools in the church before these black men got together. Monteith was one of them, a guy named John Noble, who was a very interesting character. He was a officer in the Civil War, fought for the Union in the Civil War, but he helped to form Zion Church. He also, as hard as it is to believe, was one of the persons that helped form Faith Presbyterian. John Noble was a very articulate man and
So
very.
the pastors were very socially active.
They were very active and all like that.
Is that where
actually,
people
actually,
turn
the
to for
church
justice?
itself, the church itself back then was where black folks turned for sustenance.
Right.
Because that's what they had. That's what we had.
It was a cornerstone.
Yeah, the cornerstone. They started the education. They started, like I said, community house, Christmas Attic centers. They had many clubs, Benjamin Banneker literary societies. Reverend Monteith happened to be a graduate of Lincoln University. So what he did was started a Lincoln University alumni club here in York, where many blacks went there. I know some of the Sexton guys, Charlie Sexton and another Sexton, Burgess Green, people like that went to Lincoln University because the president would come here at least once a month and talk about going to college, trying to get young black men, young black boys to go to college at Lincoln University. So they were really into literacy. Again, John Noble and them, they started this school in AME Zion Church. One of the things I read was when they started this school was one of their first graduates was a lady named Ella Robinson. And she was one of the first graduates of this school. This was before James Smallwood came in. James Smallwood was the guy that came from Philadelphia and was the longtime teacher here who the segregated Smallwood School was named after.
Wow.
Yeah, he came from Philadelphia by way of Canada. I can get into that story also, Canada. But John Noble had Ella Robinson there in the church, and Ella Robinson became a longtime teacher. She taught for over 40 years. Actually, she's credited with having more teaching years with the Pennsylvania Teachers Association and the Pennsylvania Teachers Retirement Services. She's credited with having more years teaching than any teacher ever around this area, 45 or 46 years. She taught at Smallwood, she taught at these other schools. But she was the first black graduate of York High also. Back
Let
in
me
the
give out the
1800s.
number, Mr. Kirkland. The brothers dropping some heavy bombs. I hope y'all have y'all pencil and paper out. If you want to call in, have a question or a comment, you ain't gonna get this too much. Local historian, Mr. Kirkland. Real quick. You remember me coming to your house back in the day?
Eric, I remember you very well, man, and you was always a serious guy, and all like that.
But tell the truth, I used to get on your nerves knocking on that back door all the time for Rashad.
Man, no, man. I used to love, and I used to love because that kept me in tune. I used to love my son's friends because a lot of them used to come and spend the night and all like that, and socialize. And I love it today because they still look at me and say, Mr. Kirkland, I like what you said, back then and all.
And
I used to love his
you-
friends coming to the house and
And you would
socializing.
always have us watching the Fish that Saved Pittsburgh.
Yeah. I didn't.
Dr. Yeah.
That's what I didn't
Rashad-
remember. and all
yeah,
like that.
Rashad would
But we
always
had-
play that
We
for
had
us.
the black videos and all like
Yeah,
that.
you
man.
had the whole library there.
Yeah,
That's what I was like.
I thank God that I always had that in me. The blackness, the uplift, the red, black, and green, as we call it.
Yes.
RPG.
Alicia, can you cycle the number for us? Again, 717-846-5067. 717-846-5067 if you want a question or a comment. Real quick, Mr. Kirkland, I hear a lot of people in York, as long as I've been in York, say, I got family from Bamberg, South Carolina, and that's how all of us got here. You said it's some historical reference or ties with the South and people coming to York. Could you drop a little knowledge on us about that?
Particularly Bamberg.
Wow. I never
A
understood
few people
that.
had come to Bamberg, from Bamberg early on, before my grandfather. But in 1921, I still have not identified who or what group of people bought these people from Bamberg up. But at that time, almost 200 black men from Bamberg were imported here to York.
Imported.
Yeah,
By force?
bought here. No, not by force or anything, but they recruited them. Or I really haven't gotten identified the mechanism by which they got here. But I do have a newspaper article where they do come. Actually, I have an article where they were working on the streets, paving the streets. They brought them here to pave the streets, to work in factories, particularly American Chain, Borg Warner, Certainty, you know, with some of the factories, Schmidt and all, that black men were bought up here to work. My grandfather was one of those first black men in 1921.
Wow. Now, you said the 1920s, that's around the time of the Great Migration, where a lot of blacks from the South was migrating north, thinking it would be better here. Was that part of that movement?
The Promised Land. They did an article on my grandfather a few years back before he passed. He was 100 years old when he passed, but they did an article, and he even said that he was telling the men back home, you know, to come, hey, it's nice up in York. It's like a promised land. It was almost like that. Men were coming here, like you said, looking for opportunity.
Wow, so that's how a lot of
It changed the dynamics of this community. Let me tell you about, you know, because I have some articles where some of the blacks that were already here, they didn't really appreciate the influx of other blacks coming. They say, yeah, I have articles of prominent people here in York that says, you know, when the Bambergers came, in this article, newspaper, York Dispatch, York Daily Record article, he's saying that before the Bambergers came, the white folks would let us into their movie houses, they would let us into their restaurants and other places. But when the Bambergers came, all that changed. You know, now that's actually in the newspaper article.
Newspaper. Wow.
This was in there from a guy named William Myers. Let me just talk about William Myers because he was the first black to work at the Yorktown Hotel. Yorktown Hotel was built around that time for $1 million, and he was a doorman at the National Hotel down the street further. And he was so good there that when the people built the Yorktown, they went down and recruited him to work at the Yorktown. And
we were allowed in there at that time, or just to work?
Well, not necessarily to work. We were
just to work.
A lot of men worked there. Helen Thaxton's father worked at the Yorktown. You know, a lot of men back in those days.
Could you stay there?
No.
You couldn't get a room there?
No, you couldn't get a room at that time.
Wow, man.
Well, listen, I mean, it's just diabolical the way some of the racism come down. I looked at a piece, I have a chapter in the upcoming book that I have about barbers, because a lot of people started off as barbers back then. William Goodrich was a barber. There was a barber named Merriman Coopet who became one of the richest men, one of the wealthiest men in Pennsylvania.
He's black?
He ran a barbershop over about 2 doors down from the Market Street Bridge, him and his son Jehu. They lived on Newberry Street. But he was a wealthy man. Jehu was an editor of a newspaper. He was a brilliant guy.
Now what? These were black barbers?
These were black.
What year?
But there was about 8 or 9 or 10 of them. The John Noble I was telling you about. John Joyce was a barber. Many of these guys were barber. Mr. Howard had a barber shop on George Street, and he was so good that he could only cut white men's hair. A black man, he was black.
What year
this was 18 in the mid 1800s.
Wow. So you mean Bunky wasn't the first barber?
Oh no, but barbering became a big T. And that's funny because that's one of my interviews that I have to do. I had talked with Bunky about doing an interview on how that continued to be a viable field for black men and women, you know, coming up. That barber, it sustained a lot of folks. I guess because it didn't cost a lot to get into. You know, blacks were left with nothing.
1800s.
Coopet was. They're buried out at Lebanon Cemetery. If you go out to Lebanon Cemetery, you look at some of the larger headstones, and you know how much those headstones cost. They cost a lot of money. If you look at the largest ones there, as you first go into the cemetery, you'll see Merriman Coopet and his sons. You'll see John Noble.
Were barbers in York,
now, I don't think it had barber. It just has their names on.
This is
You'll
unbelievable.
see the Grays. You see the Smallwoods out there. I mean, it was some rich folks around that time. I had a list of some of those business people. Bob Merriman Coopet. He learned barbering at the age of 10 in Baltimore from a world-renowned barber named Jacques out of Baltimore. He returned to York and set up his first business on North George Street in 1858. He was doing a thriving business, grooming all the prominent people in York. He and his son in 1859 opened up a beautiful, what they call a tonsorial parlor in the Schroeder building next to the Market Street Bridge. That's right there. You know where that small screen movie house is? Right on the Market Street Bridge when you cross it going west.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right between there and the bridge was his shop. And I actually have photographs. It was a fine tonsorial parlor, you know, that he had. He was also the first colored man to serve on a grand jury, acting as his secretary. He taught school in Lancaster. He was a prominent member of both the Masons and the Oddfellow. He was selected by the future Secretary of the Treasurer, Salmon P. Chase, as a member of the National Committee to consider the best means of betterment for the colored race. There was another guy like him, a guy that I'd like to talk about, a guy named John Noble. He was commander of the 1st Legion Post in York, which was called the David E. Small American Legion Post. And John Noble, he was one of the oldest and the best barbers in the city. His barbershop was known as the Laymeyer Building on East Market Street, right across from where the old courthouse is.
Oh,
A
yeah,
friend of mine,
yeah.
Greg Gettle, has his law office in that building now. But he was well respected and highly respected in York. He was married to a lady who was highly connected, lady named Cornelia Johnson. See, back in those days, if you were a slave, or you didn't have to be a slave, but you was a free slave, but you worked for rich folks, that gave you status in the community. People looked up to you because you worked for Mr. So-and-so and all like that. And your word was good. If there was a job open, they would come to her and say, Cornelia, how's this guy? How's his family? Does he deserve a job? And if she say yeah or no, sort of like a gatekeeper. And they've had those throughout the years, you know, gatekeepers and all. But John Noble, he was a very powerful guy. He served in the 23rd Connecticut Regiment during the Civil War. In 1891, his name was put forth as a candidate for the position of ambassador to the nation of Liberia. He was so well respected that he served as executor of estates for many of the prominent Yorkers at the time, including a guy named Hamilton Gray from Baltimore, a prominent pie merchant of the city. A lot of those merchants at that time had come up here from Baltimore, seeking better times. He also formed with a group of men in 1873, petitioned the York Borough to form their own black fire company after they got their own hook and ladder from the Laurel Fire Company. He has some connections to people here in York today because 2 of their daughters also married into prominence. One was Mr. Basil Biggs, son of a prominent Gettysburg doctor, and the other was married Alonzo King. I don't know if you know Alonzo King. He used to live right over on Princess Street, but I went to school with his daughter, Dorothy King. She's a doctor now, works for, I think, Hack, if I'm not right. I might, up in Harrisburg, or it might be the Penn State campus in Harrisburg. And her sister was Virginia King. She was a long time, Miss Jenny King, long time school teacher that just passed.
Someone had a question for you,
ago.
Mr. Kirkland. And
I'll try to answer any questions.
Also, don't forget about the photos that you have.
Yeah.
And after we answer the question, I was wondering if you could break down the climate and what brought on the '69 race riots.
Okay.
If you could break that down.
Okay.
Sister Keela, who is kind of sparking this Pan-African market, she said, who was the gentleman who led the Bamberg family to York, and what was the native indigenous connection in the South? I think you kind of already addressed that. And she said, what gentleman who led the Bamberg family to York?
I don't know if it was one specific gentleman and all. I know my grandfather was in that first wave in 1921.
Okay.
Now, I don't specifically know.
Right. You said you were still working on that
There were other guys like Mr. Henry Garvin, other people, like that who had resided on Cador Street. And these guys came to town and they set up, both him and my grandfather were bail bondsmen, back in those days. And that was something different, because they were putting up their house. I remember my grandmom used to get a little heated when my granddad would put the house up as bail for somebody that he wanted out of jail and all like that. And I know for a fact from Bonnie Grimes that he used to call my granddad Uncle Walter. And I know for a fact that he was one of the impetus for Bonnie to come here to York, when he came here to York. So it was quite a few of those men, and they had came and formed that community over on Cador Street. That's a big story in itself, because people had to move over in certain areas of town and all. That's a big story of how people were congregated in certain areas of town. And one of the chapters in my book is called Scatter to the Winds, the disruption of black neighborhoods and all, and why that happened and when it happened and all.
You want to tell us about the notorious 69 race riots. Like what? How did that? Because I wasn't even here. Like what happened with that?
69. That was the year Taka Knee was shot. The
Okay.
riots, things that led up. 68, of course, happened when Chester Roach fired upon a group of young black guys, my brother and them included, Rick. He still has the pellets in his back from that incident.
That was a police officer?
No, he was just a everyday white guy fellow that lived over top of one of the stores over there called Huffman's Meat Market. And my brother and a few of those guys were coming through the alley, Mike Wright, a couple of them, Tyrone, quite a few guys. And he was telling them to be quiet, they're making too much noise. He said, just an epitaph, why don't you N-word guys just...
Now, what part of town is this?
This was right on Pope Avenue, right by Penn Street.
Oh,
It's a
okay, in that
vacant
area. I
yard
remember
right
my
now.
dad used to always say, stay away from Newberry Street.
Yeah,
even when
that was
there.
that was down a little further,
Uh-huh.
and all. But he ended up shooting these guys. That was '68. It was one of the first incidents of a mass shooting. Now, could you imagine a man shooting 11 guys, 11 people today, and getting away with it, and
Wow.
walked away?
He
And these
wasn't
guys-
charged or nothing?
No, he wasn't charged. He was yes, he was charged, but he was found innocent. And if you look at the newspaper article, they got newspaper articles to verify. I'm not just talking, talk. I have newspaper articles to verify all this stuff. He was charged due to lack of evidence, even though all these people were shot and turned up at the hospital, and the police came in and took him out of there in the armored car. And that's when things started, happening that night. That was the 68.
68.
So 69 you were asking about was the incident with, things had not died down.
Right. But you're
60
saying that really kind of got it.
Well,
going.
that really lit the spark to light all the anger and the disenchantment and all that was going on with blacks in our community. It just didn't happen overnight. For years, people had been living in substandard housing. I mean, substandard housing in the worst, ghetto areas in the community and all. And could not get any help and all. We had some of the ministers. I remember Miss Hopewell got an article. She was the wife of the principal of the segregated school, Mr. Hopewell. She would go around talking to church groups, white church groups, pleading for them to let blacks live on regular streets at that time. The headline in the article, it says blacks are forced to live in the alleys. And they lived on back streets and, places like Fry's or Cador Street, Howard Alley, where many of the folks were living.
Wow.
So it built up to that. It was housing conditions. Of course, one of the prime motivators was the police dogs, where they would sick dogs on you, just like you saw the pictures in the South, where they're sicking dogs on the rider, on the people,
It's
and
unprovoked.
putting them unprovoked on a lot of times. It was a major incident, two major incidents that set that off. That was a few years before the riots, but it just increased the anger. One was out on Fry's Avenue when they sicked the dogs on many of the Ronnie, I'm getting a mind freeze here now and all like that. Banks, some of the Banks family really bit them up bad and all, and just, telling the police officer, one of them was a guy named Sweeney, I think, just telling them to kill, and
Sister Claiborne said Newton Alley. Does that sound?
Newton Alley was another one. Newton Alley was back in when it first started. Some of these people I was talking about earlier, Miss Joanne Johnson and them people lived on Newton Alley. It wasn't, a really bad place when they lived there. And they lived there for like 30, 40 years, back in the early 1800s. Those places were there. The other incident I was talking about police dogs was the two that really sparked anger and feelings in the community was the one on Fry's Avenue and the one on Newberry Street. When they hit James Moore, James Paget, Coy Moore, and a couple other people down there. They sicked the dogs on them right in front of a place called Freddy's, which was a hangout joint where everybody hung out. One of my relatives, Fred Sexton, ran that joint. He was one of the black entrepreneurs back in the days. He had a grocery store up across the street from the earlier mentioned Reverend Montoose black bookstore, but he also had, it was sort of like a club, people go in and
Just a
play
hangout.
pool, a hangout.
No one bothering no one.
No, they go in there just to have fun and all like that.
So you mean the police would just randomly come by and just?
The police was openly vicious back in those days, and it just created a lot of people. People were petitioning, to get rid of those dogs, and they had a mayor there who would walk down the street with his big police dog. And he said, no, they ended up putting a statue out to the police dogs, about the police dogs. That incident, those police dogs motivated one of the largest demonstrations that ever happened in York. And that was a rally that they had in Penn Park. It was in conjunction with the bombings of these girls down south, protesting those and other local issues. And almost 2,000 people rallied in Penn Park. What happened to all the ministers? You mentioned about churches earlier. All the ministers in black churches in York got together, and that Sunday that this rally was happening, they all left their church at 12:30 and marched towards Penn Park. There's photographs of it. I have photographs.
Wow, I
of
would
these
love to
people,
see that.
People, almost 2,000 people in the park
2,000
rallying, protesting these police dogs and the mistreatment and the discrimination that was going on in this community. So we had people that were really motivated. I was talking earlier about some of the people that were business people, and I really wanted to mention a couple of those anyway. This guy, Mr. William Wood, he was an old and much respected Yorker who took a great deal of interest in looking after his people. He was by profession, a master machinist, considered to be one of the best in the city. He worked for a time from the foundry of Phineas Davis. He fitted up and put together one of the first steam railroad engines for a Pennsylvania company, which competed with other engines from Massachusetts and Maryland. And this engine won as one of the best designs. I have a picture of that going down the tracks on Market Street, a trolley. He was also a prominent member of the AME Zion Church since its beginning. He lived on Newberry Street for over 50 years. His son was also engaged as a top machinist, and they had a machine shop where it was run entirely by blacks down on Newberry Street. Mr. Wood also worked on the first steamboat to sail on the Susquehanna River back in those days. You know, Mr. Quilla Howard, longtime superintendent. That's where the other segregated school was named after. You know, these guys were prominent men. Harry Woods, he ran a cigar store and a pool room on the corner of George and King Street for more than 12 years.
Mr. Kirkland, Mr. Scott wanted you to tie in with the race riots about Steve Freeland and Big Smick.
Smickle.
Yeah. And to continue on with that great history about how all that transpired, if you could.
That was our peers, man. That was 69 and all. That's when Lily Bell Island was killed, and that's when Detective Shad was killed. Supposedly, I mean, that's what the big trial in 2001 was about, trying to pinpoint who those guys were that fired that shot that penetrated the armored car. No one can say, you know, that they convicted, I think, Smick and Steve, you know, doing that. But it was guns all over the place, you know, that evening and all throughout that week. And, you know, after the young man did all the shooting, Chester Roach was his name, that shot my brother and 11 other guys that evening. Black folks, again, were fed up. And they went home, and it might not have been right, you know what I mean, but they went home and got their guns and looked out for any police or anybody else almost that was white that was coming through the neighborhood. You got to remember, Dent Sply was up there. People used to come back and forth to work. Borg Warner was across the bridge, so people was riding through those neighborhoods going to work. And they would get picked off, you know, shot at just because they were white at the time because of the anger and the retaliation mode that people were in.
Hold on, bro.
I gotta slow down on this because I get the rambling on because it's so much, you know.
Whoever tried to call in, the volume got turned down. Call back in if you have a question, because we definitely want your questions to be answered, man. I can already see that we're gonna have to do a part 2.
Well,
this we're rolling.
Eric, I mean, Brother Sharif, this is what I'm doing is just like the tip of the iceberg. This is almost, I've been doing this out of love and passion for this black history and all. My cousin Stevie Harley was a teacher, award-winning teacher nationally, and she came off of Princess Street. Princess Street was one of the few streets that the system let stay whole. By that I mean they didn't break them up like Cador Street and all. And it was important because what I said earlier about culture and traditions, those type of things are propagated on different streets. That's where your neighborhoods, you know, you heard people say, well, if Miss So-and-so saw me doing something wrong, it was almost like my parent doing wrong. That's because they knew everybody on those streets. So it was a lot of teachers that came off of Princess Street.
Power. Yes.
wanted to ask that if Mr. Kirkland could kind of expound on a little more on Penn Park and how it played a part in the community, because it seems like Penn Park had a lot going on when it concerned the black community and stuff.
Right.
So I wanted to hear more about it.
Right. Well, that's a point that's I have a sore point about Penn Park, particularly the bandstand that was torn down there. That was a central, a focused meeting point, a rallying point for the black community for as long as I was alive, and even before that. You know, people, when anything happened, you would have people would rally there at Penn Park. The students, my brother carried them 68. You know, they had a big rally there. We bought the first Pan-African Festival to York in 1980 at that bandstand there.
Wow.
And it was just a rallying point. And just like our neighborhoods, I was talking about destabilizing the neighborhoods to break up that cohesion in that culture. I can't prove it, but I have in my heart that they deliberately tore that bandstand down to dispel our ability to rally in that area and all. Now, they have a bandstand out on Kiwanis Lake, Kiwanis Park, and I think they spent over almost $300,000 just for to restore the roof of that bandstand.
You mean at Farker Park?
On Farker Park.
Wow.
Go look at that copper roof they have on there. But the bandstand on Penn Park, which was a beautiful place, it had graffiti and things on it and all like that, but they end up just tearing that down.
Well, you know, they always say the same thing they always do. Oh, these black people there smoking weed. We had to get rid of that place.
Yeah, there were
And
complaints,
they were drinking
like that,
and all
or
that
or clogging up the bathrooms and whatever it was and all like that. It did not have to be torn down and all like that. But Penn Park, Penn Park was where Miss Thaxton would come to meet children. She was one of the longtime teachers. I know you heard of Miss Thaxton. Taught at CA for over 30 years, many years without getting paid. Her father was a Mr. John Reeves, and he was a prominent porter at the hotel for 31 years. He also had a hot oyster shop, and he sold oysters. It must have been a popular thing back then because he saved enough money to give Miss Helen Thaxton and her sister their own home, before they left home at the time and all. And that's why she was sort of like self-sufficient, so she could do that. The connection with Penn Park, like I was saying, is people used to bring their children to Penn Park over there where the big church is, the bell tower up there, and she would walk down Maple Street. Chris Pizzadix had moved up to Maple Street at that time. She would walk down Maple Street and meet those kids there and walk them up Maple Street to her classes and all,
Wow.
So it was a rallying point for that. I remember they had a jet and some cannons on Penn Park. And they were some of our play. We rode and played in those jets. I mean, the real fighter jets that they bought in the park. I actually have a picture of some of my friends and all on that old jet there that used to be on Penn Park. I mean, it was just a central point. The brothers from out east would come to Penn Park to play the brothers from Cador Street around Penn Street area, football or basketball and all. It was a peaceful, you knew it was a center of the community and all.
Mr. Kirk, you want to show us some of your photos?
Yeah. Let me show you that
Brother
first
Jenkins,
one.
you good? You get your question answered, brother?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys.
All right, keep
I'm enjoying the show.
All right, keep listening in, brother.
It's so much more, Brother Jenkins, but because I was telling Eric, I've been doing this just for a couple years, really gathering this stuff together. I've been doing it for a lot of years, really in my heart. But I intend to put together this book, putting out trying to put this information together in a more cohesive fashion, with all this other information that's in here. So I'm hoping people will wait for that.
Need a class.
Yeah.
Need a class.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Kirkland. Have you had a chance to read that other book they have out on the history of York?
Yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts?
I know the guy personally, man, and I was just telling Brother Sharif that he took a lot of flack in the community for putting that book together because he told somewhat of a story that the founding fathers here don't like to be told. Even me telling the stories that I tell, some people that's in power here don't like those stories being told. Why do you have to bring that up? Why you have to tell those things? Because, these are things that cause the conditions that we have today.
Referring to this book, Mr.
Yeah,
Kirkland,
the
the
civil
story of civil
rights.
rights in York, PA, 250-year interpretive history. History of
That was by a guy
civil rights.
named Jim
in York,
Kalish.
PA.
He's in Maryland at the time right now, and I was trying to consult with him. I talked with him a couple months ago, in the formation of putting my book together and all. So I think he did a fantastic job in that. like any history book, it's always omitting something. It's not a complete story, but I think for what he did, he did a fantastic job on that. And you can get a good understanding of why things are the way they are by checking this book out.
Right. No. Well, thank you guys so much thank you, Mr. Kirkland, for what you're doing.
Yes, sir.
I really appreciate it. You guys take it easy.
Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you, brother.
What I'm doing is just a tenth of what needs to be done, so I'm hoping to recruit some other folks. I just got a 501c3 stipulation from the Internal Revenue Service, so I hope to grow this organization to where we could have younger people that will follow this and make this thing a reality. You know, that's just not a Jeff Kirkland thing and all. This is a community history project.
I could only
and we all
imagine
need-
the impact it would have on our youth
Yeah.
who don't not only know their own history, but
Yeah.
they just think, oh, nothing's in York. It's no history here. We got to move somewhere else to be proud. This would be so powerful. Turn it into like a class, even if it's just once a quarter or something. It would be powerful. Do you want to show some of the?
That's a great idea.
Some of the photos.
Let me show this first photo here. This relates to the talk we just talked about, the people coming to York from Bamberg. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, the
but
TV's not
it's
on, but
called,
they can see it.
It's called York's Black Diaspora. I named it that because back in 1921, when my granddad and the men from Bamberg came to York, they were coming to York because they were looking for opportunity. And they were flowing here by the hundreds. And it turned around to this point now today, our young people are flowing out of York, looking because opportunity for them is not here. But I don't want to give the impression that York was all bad, because we raised a nation, an army of functional, of excellent young black people that have gone across the nation. You see these lines that I drew, and I have a list of over 400 names of young people, and some are older people who have gone on to other places and experienced great success in their careers and in the impact they're making on other communities. We just want to make it that to the point to where our children don't necessarily have to leave here. And that takes the unity that Brother Sharif and other people like Dominic Chapman and Tito Conquest and a lot of those, Rodney Washington, a lot of those young brothers that are working now trying to rectify this situation.
Well, people already say they want to sign up for your class, bro. I don't know how you sign up for a class. It's not developed yet.
Yeah, well, you talk
Sister
it up.
Keeler
You
said-
talk it up, so we could do,
Keeler
we could do
said
that.
sign her
It
up.
would be, I would like nothing more than to do that, because what
Yes.
that does is propagate our history. I was talking about my cousin Stevie Harley, grew up on Princess Street. She's an award-winning teacher. But she told me one time, I was getting a little frustrated, about the lack of progress here and all like that. She said, Jeff, you keep doing what you're doing, because you heard the saying about people without knowledge of its history is like a tree without roots is destined to die. She said, what you're doing is not only keeping that that tree connected, but you're, through propagating this history, you're watering those roots.
Exactly.
The things that you're doing here, talking about this culture and the history and what's happening in our black community, you're watering those roots of history and keeping them alive and making sure that historical cultural tree is even stronger than it's ever been. Let me show you one more picture here.
I got another student. Wayne Scott said he's signing up.
Wonderful, man. Yeah,
All
Wayne's. I hate to start mentioning names, but I could have mentioned his too, because he's doing wonderful things in this community. Me and my brother Kerry were talking the other day, because we get, a little weary sometime when you're out there fighting. You wonder who's going to pick up the torch, because we're up there close to 70 and all now, and we're hoping and happy to see young men like yourself and Dominic and Wayne Scott and people like that are continuing the fight to make sure things are right in town.
Right. Now, what's
This
photo?
was a picture of a black sewing factory that they had over on what they called Water Street at the time.
Wow.
Right
Here
across,
in York?
right across from where the York High cafeteria is.
Wow.
And it's Pershing Avenue now, but it was called Water Street. And Zion Church was down there. It was other things, other black churches. The Second Baptist Church was over there, right down the street from this. But this was a U.S. government program to teach black folks and all. This was in the annex to the Smallwood building. Those of you who knew about the segregated Smallwood school that was on that same street. They had a church called the Second Baptist Church, which held, and they're significant because a lot of things happened. I just want to mention this one piece about them. They held, they used to do baptismals down at the Cadorce Creek, right down on Princess Street. And I have newspaper articles where they did, it was two of them. One of them, they had 4,000 people Now, could you imagine 4,000 people?
4,000 people.
And they
at
wasn't
Cador's
all
Creek?
black. Yeah, right. Right down on the Prince Street Bridge at the Cador's Creek.
Getting baptized.
Only 3 people were getting baptized. One of the ladies was a founder of the Shiloh Church, a lady named Miss Hall. Shiloh, the old church, had a hall.
So
one of the rooms.
4,000 people came to
See that,
three.
see and support that baptismal. You know, people would come out because, like I said earlier, the church was the sustenance of our community. It was a center, you know, and a lot of things were connected with the church.
Wow,
Even
that's
business support.
That's unbelievable.
I heard you interviewed a young lady, a Greer lady that has a shop. I went down and saw her this past week. And they would be supporting that church wholeheartedly. I told her if all the churches in New York, as much money as black women particularly spend on hair products and IG, all this type of thing, if you get 10 people out of each church, you know, that's going to help sustain her building and all. That's the type of thing when, you know, churches could come together, you know, and unify and set the example of unity and propagate, you know, our culture in this community.
Yes, please show some more pictures.
We got the
and for those who are listening out there on Facebook, send me a black fist sign if you want a part 2 of this program. Well, I'm going to do it anyway, but
Faith Presbyterian Church, 1944. This was down on the corner of Duke Street, Duke and Philadelphia. A couple doors up from the corner. Those of you who know York, they know that little setback area there. This is where Faith was. This was the group of black people that broke off from the biggest white church in York, First Presbyterian, the one across from the Martin Memorial Library. And they formed this Faith Presbyterian Church. It ended up being a powerful church that had major impact on the growth and development of our community.
And Mr. Kirkland,
1944.
someone said, don't forget Miss Saxon. Who's that?
Miss, I think they're thinking about maybe Miss. There was a Miss Saxon. Now she was a great musician. Her family was a musician. Dale Saxon, Thaddeus Saxon, Ted Saxon, Mona Saxon. But I don't know if they're saying her or Miss Thaxton. Miss Thaxton was one of the most revered teachers. She probably taught more people of my age than any other teacher ever in York. You know, people that came through her kindergarten. I had many. I don't know if I bought a photo of
Keep
her.
sending me the black fist signs if y'all want a part 2 of this. I am not going to be able to sleep tonight, man. This is just
Black
amazing.
churches.
Man. Oh goodness.
The black churches. We have many black churches here in York. But you'll see the different versions where they were. I think I have an old picture of the first Zion Church up on King Street there back in 1881 and all, which is our oldest church. But these are the other black churches that are still around and propagating here.
Someone said it's Miss Irene Saxon.
Miss Irene Saxon. That's Miss Saxon I was talking about, the musician. She
Okay.
was a great musician and all. When I knew him, I went to school with one of her sons, Thad. We graduated together. He was just up here for the 50th anniversary. They lived up on the corner of Duke, up by Duke and Maple, a couple doors off the corner and all. But she was great. A lot of the affairs that they had around town, she would accompany the musicians, you know, that were performing at those affairs. Just the social activity that went on. This was one of the longest running clubs that they had in York, a social affair put on by what they called the Bid Whist Club, which ran, I think, from 1915 to the 1960s and all. And the people would dress up, you know, and they would go out and they would have, you know, a good time.
Wow.
Socialize, you know, our folks.
And
I could
don't
name many of those folks in there. and
Don't
all that
forget
had
this
impact.
book
This
also.
guy here is Mr. Joe Jenkins. He was a long-time Cub Scout leader. You know, really helped a lot of us young people out.
don't forget the book. You're in this book, Mr. Kirkland, the story of civil rights, 250-year interpretive history of York. So don't forget this book.
Many of you people that have seen my Facebook page or my website, York's Black History, saw some of these photos. This I put together to pay tribute to the many men that served in the military here in York. Military was a big thing throughout our years. When our men would come back home from the war, it was just a matter of pride to see them walking through the neighborhood in their uniforms and all. And they went off to fight for this country in spite, you know, of the unfairness and the unjust attitudes that were expressed to them over here and all. So I think probably many of our families were involved, had people that were involved in the military, and it's a point of pride in our community. Charles E. Williams Post. Charles E. Williams Post was named after one of the Williams brothers. That was one of the first families where 6 brothers were in the military at the same time. And Charles was one of the brothers that got killed during the war, and they named the Charles E. Williams Post, the Legion Post, after him.
Right. How long we got, Sister Alicia? Okay, we got 5 minutes. One book that I wanted to show, which goes right along, my good brother Akiba down in North Carolina. This is called the African American Historical Journal. 178 years of our country's history is documented by historical newspaper articles. So these are newspaper articles dating back 178 years, going all across the country. This is very hard to get. I got this in North Carolina. 178 years of newspaper articles with black history all across America. So this is a very hard piece to get. Inbox me if you want one. But anything you want to finish out
as
with,
I said
Mr.
earlier,
Kirkland?
culture and history is so important to our growth and development. It gives us a direction. It gives us purpose here in life. We have people, I mean, a lot of people, many of us, people walk around and are mixed up and just don't know what direction to go in. Gil Scott had a song out called Winter in America. And one of the lines in there was saying, well, nobody's fighting because nobody knows what to save. And at the end, he says, save your soul. And the soul of black America is what will save this country. You want to make America great? Incorporate the black history of the black man in this community and provide equal opportunity, for black people in this community. I wanted to say that this initiative that we're doing, this black thing, because I did my master thesis at Lincoln University on mental self-defense and fitness. It was called Raising the Academic Achievement of African American Males. And wherever we go, we see African American males at the brunt of any negative forces here in this community, in this community and others. And this initiative is dedicated to the many youth of this community who have lost their way, and some of them even their lives, without ever experiencing how great they are within. We have greatness within our children, and you can see it every day. And this community, like Maya Angelou said, in spite of all the negative things that have gone on, Maya Angelou says, and yet we rise.
We still rise.
We
Mr.
still
Kirkland,
rise.
we got to work on getting a comprehensive class to get this information out. I'm going to definitely, because we only got 3 minutes left,
Okay, I'm
going to
open.
definitely want to bring you back like in the near future, like this calendar year, to do a part 2, because I know you didn't show all your photos.
No,
it's so
it's-
much more we can go into about the riots and
It's
moving
so
forward.
much, yeah.
It's just so much. I mean, I'm so I don't know, filled with the spirit, as they say.
It's so
I mean,
much,
I don't know
and-
what to
and
say.
again,
I'm blown away.
That's just just a personal stuff I'm doing. It's like a tenth of the history that's all out there. I had an idea to do this with young students in the school, to let each of them start researching their own families as a way to feed this total project. You know what I mean? And then put them all together to have a much more comprehensive picture. Because I only know what I know and the experiences and the other research I did. But you know other people and experiences that I haven't. I mean, that all needs to come together.
Gotta bring it
and
all together.
Something even greater than that, and a comprehensive look at our great and
How
glorious
can
history.
someone get this book, Mr. Kirkland, if they want to get this book? How can
Well, I'm
they get it?
researching ways to find it. I thought they were selling it at the Historical Society, but evidently it's sold out and all
Yeah,
like
I
that.
got this years ago, and I
Yeah.
always, kept
I
a hold
bought
of
a couple copies years ago too, and they were like $25 and all. But now I look online, and one of the cheapest ones I've seen was like $25, $30 or more.
Well,
And
it's
some of them
it's
are
worth
going
it.
up to like 100, 160 and all like that.
It's worth it for that kind of history.
It's
Well, we
history.
definitely going
It's
to do
history.
a part 2. Just let me know when you can come back. People
Yeah.
are asking
I
for.
appreciate
We
you.
definitely need to get a class, a comprehensive class. And I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. I'm so wound up. Thank you so much, brother,
No
for coming
question.
on. This is
Appreciate
Brother
it.
Sharif
Appreciate
with the
the
Hour
invite.
Power. Tune in tomorrow night as I interview Brother Walter Jenkins about his situation. Go to Hour Power, Sharif Hamid on YouTube. Subscribe and share. You know the motto, so we can continue to lift the mind, body, and soul of our people. Thank you for tuning in.